Hey, welcome back to Smashing Pillars. I'm Samuel. I want to thank you for taking time to join me for sessions 3 and 4 of Sue Watkins' seminar on a survey of Genesis through the lens of a kingdom scope. We've learned a lot already in sessions 1 and 2. So much to unpack. But with that being said, let me just go ahead and get right into the teaching. Enjoy.
Okay, guys, as you're getting back into your places and ready to go, let me just kind of explain. Everything that's in your workbook is in the book. There's a few handouts there that's not in the book, but most everything there is in the book. And you've got the purple volume 1, hopefully. And the reason why you've got the purple volume 1 is because as I was preparing this lesson, the Lord gave me a revelation that I thought needed to be in that book. So it has things in the purple book that's not in the blue book. However, the blue book is still a good book. Okay, so it's just that there's a couple of things there that came as fresh revelation to me. If I have a chance to break that down for you before we leave today, I will. Janice and I were talking a little while ago. We will try to do another one of these before the year's out, okay? And at that time, I will go from Abraham, hopefully through Joseph. However, let me just tell you, that's also a lot of material because a lot happened during that period of time. And we have totally misunderstood what God was doing and why he was doing it. Please hear my heart on this. As I tell you, it is not just the misunderstanding of the church. It's also the misunderstanding of the Jews. They are so locked into the Levitical system that they have lost the Melchizedek. And because of that, there's also the church lost its Hebraic roots. And the church needs to go back to her Hebraic roots to understand her purpose. We are to be a one new man, where there is no Jew, no Goyim. Goy, Gentile, Greek, same term, okay? That is the final bride, the one that Jacob married to, Leah, the Mount Horeb bride. Rachel is the bride that was born at the church. But there's paganism in the church. And that's why we see the story of the teraphim and Rachel. And Jacob had to free himself of that. So there's a lot of things that are there. Okay, Jacob was a contender. He was not a deceiver. He was a contender. Abraham received the promises, but Isaac represented and foreshadowed the firstborn. But Jacob is the house of Israel. The house of Israel is one new man. And when you see these symbolisms and you put it all together, you go, how did I miss it? because it's been right there in front of us the whole time. It was in Paul's writings, but we have put a Greek mindset to Paul's writings, not a Hebrew mindset. Notice I didn't say a Jewish mindset. I said a Hebrew. You do not have to be a Jew to be a Hebrew. All you have to do is cross over from the world into the kingdom.
Amen.
That's all you have to do. That makes you a Hebrew. Hebrew is one who crosses over. The Bible explains to us what a Hebrew is and why Abraham was the first Hebrew. Okay? It has nothing to do with Eber. It has everything to do with crossing over out of the world system and living by faith. That's the whole key. That's why Abraham is the firstborn of faith. And we are all firstborns. We are all firstborns. And as soon as you come in to the kingdom, what is that? Jesus told Nicodemus, you must be born again. When you're born again, that's the first you. You're the first. Okay? You're new. You're new in Christ. And you're in Him. And He is the ultimate firstborn. So you are in Him. You are firstborn. And that's why we have to accept these things by faith. Yeah. We do not walk by sight. We do not walk by feeling. We walk by faith. And when we walk according to faith, we become the children of Abraham, the bride, because he's the one who negotiated with Yahweh for this. And more are the spiritual children than the physical children. And there's a lot of, it's a new way of thinking. And what I want to communicate to you is you have to put aside the physical, the material, and you have to enter into the spirit by faith. Long time ago, I don't know, I think it was in the 80s. Late 80s. I was walking down the hall of my house from the kitchen to the master bedroom, and the Lord said, everything you have in the hereafter, you have now. It's like, what? If you live by faith, everything you have in the hereafter, you have now. So that means that you should project yourself into the spirit realm when you pray. You worship the Lord in spirit and in truth. So it's the spirit of this. It's the spirit of Genesis that I want to get over. Okay? So that means that you have to lay aside sunlight and birds flying and fish swimming and Adam and Eve walking around among a bunch of trees naked. Just like I'm fixing to tell you, you've got to lay aside the fact that they ate an apple. They didn't eat apples. In fact, they didn't eat any kind of fruit known to mankind. Samuel has also been teaching this at Pastor Howard's church, and I'm sure he will continue. And so if you haven't watched those videos or the live streaming, please do so, because they're also awesome. He can't help it. He gets it from me.
I know where I get it.
Okay, let's talk a little bit. We're going to kind of dig into the negative side of everything now. The serpent, the nash, is defined by Strong's OT. This is 44. Strong's OT 5175. It's the root word, infers the making of enchantment such as whispering invocations or spells. The cunning snake, who was the one who was craftier than any other creature, might have hissed, but I seriously doubt it. What is really the reason why Moses used this word was that snakes or serpents were the symbol of power in the Egyptian culture. And remember, he's writing this to the Israelites who were coming out through living in the wilderness. Okay, so he's using symbolisms which they would have known and understood. He's not saying that a snake crawled up to Eve and hissed at her and she understood what he meant. He's not saying that. There's 3 ways to translate the word nignash. As a subject of the sentence, it means serpent. As a verb, it means divination. As an adjective, it's the color of bronze. When the serpent in Genesis, I think the serpent in Genesis is the same God that was pictured in Ezekiel 28. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty. You were Eden in the garden or Gan of God.
Will you back up just 1 second? Okay, as a subject and as a verb?
Yes, this is defined in your book, by the way.
Okay.
Okay, so I promise you, there's very few things I'm going to say that's not in the book. Okay, so don't worry about not catching this. And by the way, the questions that are asked you in your workbook, use your book to answer the questions. That will help you. There are points there to help you grasp a hold of what I'm saying. Okay, so again, don't feel like you're missing anything. If I venture off into a subject that's not in the book, I will let you know that I have just ventured off into a subject that's not in the book.
It'll be on the audio also.
Yeah. Yeah, please don't think that you're not good, that you have to catch every word. And listen, there's times where I have sat at my computer and stared at the screen and said, God, that cannot possibly mean that. Because it's so foreign to everything that I believed growing up. You see, I was born sitting on a pew, truly. I was saved so young, I don't remember the experience. I was filled with the Holy Spirit so young, I don't remember the experience. I was preached at because I lived in a household full of preachers. I knew the Bible. I understood that Adam and Eve ran around naked and that they ate apples.
Yeah, we all.
Okay? All right, so the enemy, or the entity rather, that is described in Ezekiel, was full of wisdom, sealed by perfection, conveys the image of a completed work. It's like taking a scroll and writing every piece of information in it that's possible to write, and rolling it up and sealing it. It's perfect. That is who we deal with. He understood the laws of government. He understood how the cosmos worked. He knew quantum physics. He understood space-time. He understood the mechanics of science, how the universe works. He also was a master musician, artist, and you go on, he knew it all. He understood the correlation between information and DNA. Okay, so let me put a finger here and explain something that I just explained a few minutes ago to Danny. When you die, Your body goes into the grave. But your soul and spirit continues forward. Your soul is your intellect, your emotions, and your will. Your spirit is the life force that God gave you when he formed you in the womb. It's the light that went on. Okay, now we do know now that the moment of conception, light bursts forth in the womb. That's the light. That's your spirit entering. Now, what do you take? You take your soul. So that means every piece of information that went into you from the moment that you started thinking, the moment you started becoming the realization of your world, until the moment you died, all of that information goes forward with you. Amen. It's written on your DNA. Your DNA makes the cells come together, the 46 chromosomes forms your DNA. Your DNA makes a copy, mRNA. Okay? That makes you function. That tells you whether your eyes are going to be blue, brown, or whatever. Your hair, how tall you're going to be, etc., etc. But it also gives you the habits and all of the things that came in from your ancestors. Okay, stress writes on your mRNA. Okay, it's called epigenetics. Epigenetics overwrites. So that's why the vaccine that we have been dealing with is rewriting mRNA. Okay? So are y'all following me with this?
Yeah, we are.
All of that is information. Information is it is the third quantum mechanics of the universe. In order for information to be useful, it must be received and transmitted. You are a receptor of information. And Jesus said, every word that you speak as a transmitter, you will be held accountable for. So, what I'm saying to you is that this God of Ezekiel 28 understood all of that. And he knows how to manipulate that and how to deceive using that. So how did he gain access to Eretz, the Gan of Eden, if he was removed from the throne room? And let me say this, because of the way that I see this, is that he was already a fallen being. Okay? Before Adam was created, chaos had already existed. Well, his knowledge of space-time gave him the ability. The Negnash was in the field of Eretz. He gained access to God's cosmic mountain, Eden, that was Adam's territory, because he was yet to be imprisoned in outer darkness. He's what we call a traveler. Probably just like this in Job 1:6. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan, the adversary, that's what the word Satan means, also came among them. And Yahweh said to the adversary, "From where do you come? Like, who gave you permission?" And he said, "I came from going to and fro." In other words, he was a traveler, walking back and forth. So, When this snake, as we say, came to Eve, she wasn't frightened. When he approached her and began to engage her in conversation, she didn't think anything was amiss. Why? Because he still has the ability to come as an angel of light. He approached her as a light being, as the Elohim. Now, we haven't really gotten into discussing the divine council, but they lived and Adam and Eve lived and interacted with the divine council. So this being coming to her didn't seem out of the ordinary. She was just carrying on a conversation with him. And when he asked her what she was doing, and he said that Elohim had not commanded them to eat out of every tree, Eve answered him and said, "We may eat of the trees of the Gan, except for the tree that is in the midst of the Gan. We cannot eat it nor touch it, lest we die." Now hold on. Here's what she actually said. "We can't go to the brazen altar, the cross, or even touch it, or we die." Touch is naga. It is Strong's OT 5060. Touching, as laying a hand upon someone. It means also to lie with a woman. These two meanings seem unrelated, but yet there's connection. The touching of someone or something that does not belong to you, that is not your property, is the same as acquiring a possession illegally. The meaning of a naga means to act angrily and to punish or destroy. So she was saying, we cannot touch this tree. We cannot destroy this tree. It's not our property. Eve's reference was touching the tree. She didn't say fruit. She said tree. After a careful examination of the text, we find that Eve believed that they were not to strike the tree with the intent to destroy it. She was referring to the tree, not to the fruit, because fundamentally she was saying we're not to remove it from the garden. The serpent, however, twisted her words. He said, "You will not surely die a death. God is aware that the foundation of your understanding will be open when you devour the fruit. You will be like the gods of the divine council, able to discern both good and bad, and render accurate judgments." This immediately caused her to compare herself to the Elohim, the people or the persons, the entities, the beings that she was associated with. It made her feel inferior. The serpent was telling her that her eyes would be open, implying that they were closed, that there was a shortfall in her intellectual understanding. But since they stood at a tree of knowledge, he was telling her the problem was easily solved. Sadly, that tactic was effective, and Eve's focus changed. She ceased thinking in the terms of obedience and began to focus on her perceived lack that was really non-existent. And that, my friend, is deception. Symbolically, the eye is the fountain of seeing, of understanding. Eve saw and took a second look at the tree. She didn't see evil. Instead, she noted that the tree's fruit was edible. Believing that it would make her wise, she ate. Eve did not eat the tree. She ate its fruit. In other words, she ate the tree's reward. Knowledge, not wisdom. There was no immediate change in her appearance when she ate. 2 Corinthians 11:3-4 says, "But I'm afraid that just as Eve was deceived by the serpent's cunning, she gave, or Nathan, the fruit to Adam. And because Eve ate, Adam ate. In other words, he ate to please her. Adam failed to uphold Yahweh's right and title to the tree. Now let's just suppose for a moment that the tree of knowledge, as I told you before when we were looking at the typograph of Jerusalem, is the brazen altar, and the altar symbolizes the cross. Then Adam's act was similar to possessing what was not his, which was the grave consequence of his sin. Do you follow me on that? He partook of the cross, the fruit of the cross, when he had no right. That was what the tree was there to represent, and why I believe it was on Moriah as an altar. I'm not saying it grew as an altar. I'm saying it represented the altar. And it became the same territory, the same spot that 4,000 years later that was Calvary, Golgotha. So it went from Adam and Eve to being the tree of knowledge to being the cross. Adam was human, but he sinned as a Melchizedek regent. Adam was her righteousness, her high priest. He was responsible at that moment for the remission of all sin. He failed to function as her priest. Instead, he joined himself to her deception. Jesus did the exact opposite. He functions as our high priest. He is responsible for the remission of our sin. And he releases us from the deception by giving us truth, because he is the truth. The nakedness that befell Adam and Eve was more than being without clothes. It was a downgrade in perception, a significant drop in their bandwidth. Bandwidth is the energy or mental capacity to deal with a situation. The irony is that Adam and Eve, for the first time, saw the physical world without spiritual eyesight. When we go to the cross, we're to let go of the physical world and see the spiritual. So they sewed fig leaves together. They heard God walking. Shama is identified by Strong's OT 8085. It means to attend intelligently, often with the implication of giving full attention. It means causively to tell. Adam and Eve listened to the distinct sound of Yahweh walking. According to Strong's OT 6963, sound or call is taken from an unused root that means to call aloud with a loud voice or a loud sound. So did they hear God walking, or did they hear him calling? Well, to fully understand, we have to add the phrase, in the cool of the day. Cool, in this instance, is actually ruah. It was the ruah of the day. It was the spirit, the wind coming. The cool of the day is the time of the day when spiritual activity is most prone to occur. Adam listened with his ears and heard Yahweh. He didn't see him. Why? Because the veil had dropped. But Jesus, at his point of death, what happened? The curtain was rent. Genesis 3:12, the man, not Adam, it's the man, different term altogether, said, the woman you put here with me, appointed to me, 49, appointed to me, she gave me or apportioned me fruit. Some fruit is not in the Hebrew. What it is from the tree, and I ate. So what he's actually saying here from the Hebrew is that the woman that you gave me appointed me the cross, and I could not carry it. She appointed me the tree, and I could not carry it, is what he's saying. Adam loved Eve. He didn't blame her. Neither did he blame Yahweh for his predicament. He blamed himself. So Yahweh turned to Eve and asked, "Why did you do this?" She answered, "The Elohim deceived me, so I ate, believing that the tree's fruit would make me knowledgeable and acceptable as the Melchizedek's bride." Although it's not stated in the text, the implication is that the three decrees that come forth is from the a meeting of the divine council. It was a high court ruling. All three decrees are a high court ruling. The judgments are handed down, and perhaps the deceiver demanded the divine council or divine court renounce Adam by removing him as the regent king. But listen, instead, here's what God did. 50. Let me paraphrase for you. Genesis 3:14. You are cursed, more so than any dumb beast. You shall walk as they do. You travel, okay, you shall travel, but by the seat of your desires. As you are like the serpent, you shall consume the ash and the dust of perversion as you roam the field. The perversion of your desire will control you, causing hatred between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. There shall be hostility. Your army will snap at the rear of his army, not her army, his army, but his army shall overwhelm the leaders of yours. Yahweh viewed the deception that the serpent penetrated against Eve as high treason. Since he had deceived his victim and acted unlawfully, the serpent lost all standing. The allowance made to him was that he would continue. We see that in this Genesis 3:14, that he's allowed to continue to roam. And Ezekiel 28 notes that the adversary is traveling about filled with violence from within. Violence or karmak refers a violation of authority. He purposely went beyond his sphere of influence to corrupt. He traded righteousness for evil. Traded is defined by Strong's OT 7402 as rekah. It's a primitive root that means to travel for trading. He's a merchant of evil. So again, we can connect the curse that is spoken here to the serpent as a decree that permitted him to be a traveler for a limited season. The ancients believed that one's belly was the seat of their emotion. It's not here or here, it's here, is where your emotions are. Hence, the expression serpent was bound to his belly. For all intents purpose, he was placed under subjugation of the Melchizedek kingdom. The reality of that subjugation, as Paul would say, waits to the advent of the second coming. That's why it's crucial to understand that the adversary's power, his abilities were not made void. He was not stripped of power. He was stripped of authority. Yeshua told his disciples, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. I have given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions and to overcome the power. You see the difference? Of the enemy. Okay. The authority is his, but he gives you the power to overcome. Luke, I think that was Luke 10:18. Yeshua is speaking of authority, and he's witnessing that he witnessed the adversary lose his, but he's relegating power. The only other occasion that we see this word gagan or belly is used in Scripture is Leviticus 11:42. It says, whatever goes upon its belly, whatever goes upon all fours, whatever soever has more feet among the creeping things that creep upon the earth, you shall not eat, for they are an abomination. Abomination refers to idolatry. Yahweh then said, I will put enmity, meaning I will put hatred between you and her seed, the eternal Melchizedek. You will bruise those in the rear of his army, rear meaning the end time army, but he will overwhelm your leadership. These terms are militaristic and equate with war. To bruise correlates with shock and awe. We are to shock and awe. Heal is in the army's rear flank. The nuance of these terms are prophetic insight relating to the end times and coinciding with the tribulation against the saints and ending with the battle of Armageddon. Genesis 3:15 is a judgment that states the reason for everything the enemy has done since that moment and will do until his final demise. He hates Yeshua and his offspring. The Antichrist hates the Melchizedek. Let me just say, parenthetically on this, that Genesis 3:15 is the reason that we see all the other things happen. It is the pivotal moment, if you will, of this decree, because the enemy again is trying to go against the times and seasons that has been allowed. He knows his demise is coming. Now let's turn to decree 2. Yahweh would multiply her sorrow, which indicates that she was sorrowful. I have no doubt that Eve regretted that she listened to the Elohim. However, God was not angry with her. Rather, as a loving father, he turned from the serpent and spoke to her. We might better understand the weight of his response to Eve if we connect Genesis 3:16 to John 3:16. Yahweh spoke prophetically. He gave her the pattern of solution and not a curse. We have been conditioned to think that Genesis 3:16 is a curse. No, it was not. Yahweh was decreeing to her a son. For God so loved the world, he gave a son. That's what he was saying. Yahweh addressed the spiritual problem, assigning to her a savior and providing restoration. You see, after declaring a seed war with the serpent, Yahweh turned to Eve and began to prophesy a seed was coming. And he would be given to her, a seed who would destroy the works of the enemy. The seed who would come through her feminine nature. That seed would overcome the adversary and reverse the devastation from the deception that had been inflicted upon her. Yahweh said, Eve, you will toil and you will labor, and it will be painful, but that must be because you must conceive the Melchizedek lineage. You must fulfill this prophecy, for I have placed a desire within you, and from now on that renewed passion will enable you to receive the Melchizedek seed from your husband. I hope you are getting the symbolism of this. God had already placed within her the ability to receive seed, yet at that moment she had not. So Yahweh lit her passion anew with a new fire. As Yahweh's words entered Eve, they created a pathway for the eternal Melchizedek and for those who were in his inheritance. God gave a sign in Genesis 3:16 for the pre-writing of the genealogies that would be recorded in Matthew 1 and in Luke 3. It would take 4,000 years for the birth of the promised seed. Still, in that moment, in Genesis 3:16, the lineage of Yeshua was established, and his birth was authorized. It was a divine decree. Adam was also not cursed. The ground was cursed for Adam's sake. Adam was judged. The decree issued against him subjugated him to the spirit of death. Adam would die. Therefore, it became his responsibility to replace himself. He would need to image himself. Thankfully, Yahweh had already given him seed to do so. The reason a curse was not placed on Adam takes a little bit more of understanding. We must look back to when the rain of the Holy Spirit fell on Eretz. It watered to sanctify the Adamah as olive tav. Remember? Causing it to be suitable to form the olive tav man. Yahweh was forced to decide whether to remove Adam as the Melchizedek regent are to revoke the Aleph Tav blessing from the Adamah. If the Adamah remained Aleph Tav, it would have to continue to serve the Melchizedek. The soil could be still tilled by commanding it to produce. But on the other hand, if Yahweh removed Adam from Eretz, the covenant that he had sworn to in Psalms 110 would become void. It would be broken because Yeshua's image would be removed. The Melchizedek throne vacated, and there would be no sitting king or regent in Eretz. So Yahweh was forced to start, in theory, we would say that Yahweh was forced to start over, to establish another government that was not Melchizedek. But that option is not acceptable. It was also not possible. Adam imaged the eternal Melchizedek. And so Adam was one of a kind. And because his sin, he owed the death penalty. So Yahweh took two actions on Adam's behalf. He placed the penalty of Adam's sin, removed it from the regent, and put it on the eternal. And Adam's act of disobedience on the Adamah by removing the hay from the Adamah. Because the Lamb was already agreed before the foundations of the earth that Adam's penalty would be paid. Yeshua's blood was already on the altar, already flowing down from the cross to the Adamah so that it would show blood, which in Genesis 3 it did not. God, eternal God, looked down and saw that it would. The Adamah and the serpent were cursed, but neither Eve nor Adam were. Both would remain in their fallen state until they could be born again. So note the spelling of the Adamah. The hay was removed, and it was placed spiritually within Adam. That hay added breath to his life. So instead of dying an instant death, Adam lived for 930 years. But the cursed soil died instantly, and it no longer can bring forth life, as it did on day 3 and on day 6. From that moment on, the best the Adamah can do is to assist man in the growing process. Yahweh said, "Behold, the man has become like one of us, to know good and evil. And now lest he put his hand and also take from the tree of life and eat and live forever." So Yahweh sent him out of the garden, not out of Eden, out of the garden. Know in this sense infers intimate relationship. To know has the effect of integrating a concept into the psyche. Adam and Eve ingested information. It was the tree of knowledge. I can't tell you how many times I sat there and said, "Oh, that's just too simple. That's just too simple. No, wait. It says fruit. So they had to eat fruit, right?" And why is it called knowledge then? That's what they ingested. Knowledge. I'm not saying that they didn't eat it. They didn't put it in their mouth and chew it. But whatever it was, whether it was a virus or whatever, it overwrote their DNA. So in some regard, they became like the Elohim. From that moment on, they were capable of good thoughts and evil ones. You see, it overwrote their DNA. Before, they were only capable of thinking in the terms of Yeshua, because he was what they imaged. But now their bandwidth is lowered, but also their DNA has been overwritten, and they have a sin nature now, rather than a pure, righteous nature. So the fruit of the forbidden tree transmitted information. It wasn't apples or oranges. It was the tree, Daleth, of Tob and Ra, the knowing of good and evil. The fruit of that tree passed to its partaker knowledge in the form of information. The information rewrote their DNA. It damaged Adam and Eve permanently as it entered their genetics, which they passed on to the next generation and on and on and on and on, so that we are all born with a sinful nature. Yahweh then turned and built an altar. He slaughtered at least one animal, probably more. And from there he formed skins, covering both Adam and Eve. And the garments of skin which they wore, God made for Adam and Eve and sent them out of the garden. Those skins covered their nakedness and gave them a temporary state of righteousness. Yet those garments did not redeem them from their fallen state. A temporary state of righteousness only. Note the phrasing of Genesis 3:24. He drove out the man, he placed the cherubim east of the Garden of Eden, and a flaming sword which turns every which way to guard the way to the tree of life. Genesis 3:24 is stating that the cherubim guard the ancient gate leading to the tree of life with olive tav swords, flaming swords to be specific. They refer to these flaming swords in Hebrew actually is referring to enriching words that enrapture the listener. Therefore, the tree of life is also information. How this fits together right now, I don't know. I just know that that's what in the book of Revelation, we're told that the tree of life is therapean, which means therapeutic. So it brings healing. Okay. 52. Genesis 4 is our next subject. Any questions at this point about this? Okay.
Can I ask one question? And this might be out of order, but how can Satan steal our DNA? Is there a way?
I don't think he steals your DNA as much as he overwrites your DNA.
Right. Okay.
Okay, Genesis 4 is the story of Cain and Abel. And let me just say this kind of parenthetically before we move on. From here on out, especially from here to Genesis 12, when we are introduced to Abraham, every story is a progression of evil that's interrupted by the flood of Noah. But that flood is to counter the evil that was coming up. So what we're seeing is a progression of evil in 4, 5, 6. Well, 5 is just really genealogy. So 4 and 6 and then we get over into especially 10 and 11. We're going to see a progression of evil. The ancients believed that evil came in 3 phases. You had the garden, then you had the Nephilim, Genesis 6, and then you had the Tower of Babel. So I want to talk about each one of these as much as I can and get in here, because I can't talk about these in detail and still get to Abraham. So this is why we're going to need to do another session, if you guys want it. So let's go to Hebrews 12:23. It calls the believer to the general assembly and the church of the firstborn, which are written in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of just men made perfect. All right, so the general assembly is translated from the Greek paneguras, and it is a combination of pas, the whole thing, and agora, town square. Paneguras refers to the whole community or the whole town square where the community comes and assembles to determine a matter. So what we're talking about here is basically the divine counsel. So essentially, I could paraphrase this and say, when we stand on Mount Zion, Yah's holy city, we're united with those who assemble as the host of heaven and with the church of the firstborn. The host of heaven is celestial, but the church of the firstborn, well, the Greek says it is the ecclesia of the protostikto. Ecclesia means those who are called out from a thing. You know, it's kind of like being a Hebrew and crossing over. Just saying, if you want to put them together. It means to think differently, which is what repent means. Yeshua is the firstborn. He's the protostiktos. In this instance, it means the foremost or the original, which means he is the eternal. Tikto means seed, so we're going to deal now with Genesis 3:15 and again. So in other words, the ecclesia of the protostiktos is the church of the promised seed. Young's literal translation of Hebrews 12:22 says, "But you have come to Mount Zion and to a city of the living God, to the heavenly Jerusalem, and to the myriad of messengers, to the company and assembly of the firstborn in heaven enrolled, and to the God, the judge of all, and the spirits of righteousness, righteous men made perfect, to the mediator of a new covenant." The new covenant, by the way, is just merely a renewal of the covenant that God made with Abraham. Jesus, and to the blood of, and have you come to the mediator of a new covenant, Jesus, and to the blood of sprinkling, speaking better things than Abel. And that's what I want to get to, is speaking better things than Abel. Why was that written there? Why mention Abel at that point? It's because he's talking about firstborns. Adam knew Eve. He was intimate with her. He knew her function was to assist him and to procreating himself. So she conceived and gave birth to Cain and said, "I have gotten a man on Olive Toph from Yahweh." Conceived is Hara, and in this concept it implies that she received her child from the head of the government. Indeed, Eve credited Yahweh, saying, "I have gotten a man-child from Yahweh." She was not saying that she conceived from Yahweh or by Yahweh, but the life of the child that she conceived and bore was from Yahweh. Eve named a son, her firstborn, Cain. His name was a play on words. In Strong's OT 70:14, Kayan is a derivative of Kana. Kana means to create by the procurement of purchasing. Eve considered her son to be a procurement. She likely thought that he was the one that would restore the Melchizedek kingdom to its original purpose. Note the wordings of Genesis 4. Eve bore again. She had another son. Eve did not conceive twice. Conception only happened once. Therefore, she gave birth twice, means she delivered twins. This understanding is not mine. It's not exclusive to me. The rabbis of the Second Temple also taught the same thing, that Cain and Abel were twins. Ava, or Abel, the second son, was also Olive Toph. According to Strong's OT 1892, Abel or Haba means emptiness, a vapor, a vanity. Figuratively, it means something transitory, unsatisfactory. Abel is most often used as an adverb rather than a noun. Abel was viewed as the spare heir, having no true value. He was perceived as having no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. Nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected, a man of sorrow and familiar with suffering. Abel was Raha, a shepherd. So in the figurative sense, he represented the good shepherd, Yeshua, who said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. Cain, however, was a tiller of the ground. This abad means literally one who serves. Adam was expelled from the garden and sent forth to till or serve the Adamah. He was to till the soil. Actually, he was to preach the kingdom throughout Eretz until it was ready for the harvest. And because he's the elder twin, Cain was expected to continue Adam's work. When these two brothers became men and they reached the age of maturity, they were taken to the altar of Yahweh. They were aware that only one of them would be anointed as firstborn. Therefore, they sought approval, and what they were seeking for was crucial. Obviously, Cain expected to be the firstborn because he was the firstborn. But Adam must have been uncertain because he took both sons to the altar. Cain went with the fruit of the Adamah, and whether he intended to or not, his offering represented the fruit of what Yahweh had cursed.
Yes, amen.
Abel, however, brought the firstling of his flock. Firstling in this case in Strong's 1062 defines the firstling as the firstling of a man or a beast. The firstling actually here is representing his birthright of firstborn. So Abel brought to the altar his birthright. In the literal sense, Abel went to the altar with a human substitute. Hebrews 11:4. By faith, Abel offered God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, though which he obtained witness that he was righteous. Okay, just that little phrase right there should catch your attention. He obtained the witness that he was righteous. So God said, Abel, you're the firstborn of the Melchizedek because you are righteous. God testifying of his gifts through it, even though it be dead still, his gift speaks. Yahweh accepted Abel's offering and rejected Cain's. The book of Jasher suggests that the two brothers later quarreled over the land. So in other words, they were quarreling over who had the firstborn rights. More specifically, they clashed over who was to oversee the field. So they were discussing or arguing over the responsibilities assigned to firstborns. Let me put a little pin right here and say, okay, your firstborn is your firstborn of a generation, not the firstborn of a family. There's a difference. You have a firstborn of a family, but you also have a firstborn of a generation in the Melchizedek lineage. The firstborn of a generation represents the entire generation. The firstborn of a family only represents the family. Okay? Are we clear on that? So what we're talking about here is not the firstborn of the family. We're talking about the firstborn of the generation. And you have that firstborn has the responsibility to oversee the righteousness of their generation.
How far back does the generation go? You said it's
I'm a generation, my daughter's a generation, my grandchildren are generations. It's kind of thing. It's like from son to son to son. That's a generation. We're not measuring time on this. We're measuring the generation. Okay. Jasher indicates that Canaan was jealous and saw a pretext to slay Abel. Cain slew his brother, and subsequently a judgment was rendered against him. Yahweh dealt with Cain based on kingdom rules. This is kingdom business here. Because what did he do? He slew the firstborn of the generation that was to inherit the Melchizedek. You follow what I'm saying here? So the firstborn of the generation belonged to Yahweh. That's when you get down into Deuteronomy and others. God says the firstborn belongs to me. Okay. So the decision against Cain didn't come from Adam or the divine council. It came directly from Yahweh because Abel was his. Cain had transgressed against a firstborn, and therefore he had transgressed against Yahweh. This is why Yahweh asked, "Where is your brother?" And Cain answered, "I know not. Am I my brother's keeper?" Yahweh responds, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries to me from the Adamah." Cain, believing that Yahweh had rejected him and not just his offering, replied, "Hey, I'm not the firstborn. He's the firstborn. Hey, he's my elder. I'm not his keeper." That's basically what he said. Yahweh's response is, "Hey, your brother's blood cries to me." Abel's blood as the firstborn could not remove the curse on the Adamah because he was not yet Melchizedek. Adam was still Melchizedek. And that explains why Hebrews 12:24 says, "To Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and speaks to a sprinkled blood that speaks a better, stronger, more powerful word than the blood of Abel." Abel was the firstborn and not a Melchizedek. When Jesus died, he died as a Melchizedek. I hope you're getting this. How much have we missed? Really, how much have we missed the depth of God's word? Cain was cursed because he removed the firstborn from the eris, from the field. So he was sent from Eden. Cain's response is, "My punishment is more than I can bear. You have driven me out from the faces of the Adamah. Before your face I will be absent, removed and shaken as one who mourns, and everyone who finds me will slay me." We're told that he was marked with an oath, which means a sign, a token, and it was actually receiving the tav as a mark. Cain was sealed by covenant by Yahweh. The tav represented a covenant and ownership. At that time, the mark would have been drawn literally as a cross. Cain went from the face of Yahweh, meaning he left the mountains of Eden or Jerusalem and moved to the area east of Eden and a land that is called Nod. Strong's OT 5113, which, by the way, is Babylon. It's the same area that would be post-flood be called Babylon. And he built one of the world's oldest cities, which eventually would be where the Tower of Babel would be placed. Adam, as the Melchizedek, again knew Eve after the death of Abel, and she brought forth another son who would be the firstborn. She named him Seth because he was a substitute for the one who was slain. Seth also had a firstborn who he named Enos. Enos means mortal. And after his birth, humanity became hostile to Yahweh. Meaning, then men begin to call upon the name of the Yahweh. That does not, what it means is they begin to profane the name of Yahweh. The word call is profane. They didn't worship him. They cursed him. Why? Because the gods begin to travel. Genesis 5 is a listing, or a roster if you prefer, of the pre-flood firstborns. And I have that in your workbooks and your book. Not all set as Melchizedek. At least 7 firstborns, based on how we interpret Genesis 5, served as Melchizedek. The Apostle Peter suggests that there were actually 8, which includes Noah. 10 generations from Adam to Noah. 10 firstborns, 8 Melchizedeks. 2 Peter 2:4. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into the chains of darkness to be reserved to judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the 8th person, a preacher of righteousness, means that he was a Melchizedek, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. Peter did not indicate that Noah and 7 others were on the ark. That's not what he said in that verse. In fact, the ark is not even mentioned in this verse. Peter declared that Noah was the 8th messenger of righteousness. His calling was to be a preacher of righteousness. That's what a firstborn did. They entered the priesthood and they officiated as priest. The Melchizedek was the high priest and officiated as king. Thus, Noah was his 8th Melchizedek regent, which is what Peter was saying, and why God spared Noah from judgment. The word that Peter employed here as preacher is, I'm going to murder this, Gurux or something like that. It's defined in Strong's New Testament 2783 as one who heralds truth. A herald is one who proclaims. So what did Noah proclaim? That divine judgment was pending against the earth. If people did not return to Yahweh and his system of righteousness, they would be destroyed. Genesis 6:1. Now it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, all who they choose. There are only 2 superior, non-appointed thrones in the cosmos. Yahweh's and Yeshua's. That's it. All other thrones are appointed. They're secondary thrones. Or they come to the throne illegally. That makes the genealogy records of Adam's descendants crucial. Adam was the son of God. He was the only one that of mankind, human, that can be called a son of God. Are we okay over that? Okay. Rest of us become sons of God when we're born again. But Adam was created as a son of God. That's why Yeshua had to show his lineage all the way back. Because Adam was the original Melchizedek regent. So Yeshua's lineage had to go all the way back. And I'm not going to get into the lineage now, but there was a reason why he had to show his lineage to David. He had to show his lineage to Judah. He had to show his lineage to Abraham. He had to show his lineage all the way back to Adam as the son of God, to be able to take that Melchizedek crown. Okay? Even though he is the first and the last Melchizedek. He was the original Melchizedek and he is the last Melchizedek. But he inherited the Melchizedek in his first advent coming as the son of. Are you following what I'm saying? Okay. So they had, because he had to show that he had complete and total right to that title. By man's records. Not by God's records, but by man's records. All right, so this is why Moses ended the roster of Genesis 5 with Noah and his 3 sons. The accounting of the pre-flood. Hold on. Dry mouth gets my tongue tied. The accounting of the pre-flood firstborns was a matter of record. The firstborn of Noah's sons had yet to be appointed. In fact, the firstborn would not be selected until after the flood. Moses, of course, knew who that was going to be, but he deliberately withheld that information in Genesis 5. Instead, he transitioned from 5 to 6 and it came to pass. As previously stated, Adam did not leave the physical territory of Eden. As the man multiplied, they spread out, moved beyond the immediate area. But when they spread out and moved away, they moved away from Adam's influence. They left and became unprotected. And therefore the gods came in. And evil intensified. Other sons of God began to enter and travel into and out of Eretz, trespassing again upon the territory assigned to Adam. This is why we have not that I'm preaching Greek mythology, please understand I'm not. But it's very informative because it gives us an insight. A lot of it is strictly legend, but there's also a grain of truth in there. Okay, so we have what we have happening is as these fallen gods begin to come into the earth and begin to take women for themselves. They weren't taking them for wives, please. They weren't. They were using them for for their DNA. Okay? And the wickedness, because men were spread out, they were not living under the influence of the Melchizedek. He's now a physical man, limited to location. And he's not in control because people are leaving his influence. It's kind of like by the time your children leave home, they leave your influence. They begin to go their own way, sometimes even before they leave home. And the same thing with, so this is kind of what's going on here. And men's hearts become evil and they become perverted. And by the time we get down to Genesis 6:4, God said, there's no true righteousness anywhere anymore. The intent, get this, the intent of his heart, in other words, his DNA has been perverted with deception and misinformation. Continually, I will destroy man who I created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping things and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I made them. The judgment decree was not against the righteous, but against the evil. Genesis 4:26, and as for Seth, to him also a son was born, and he named him Enosh, and then men began to call on the name of the Lord. I've already told you, it means that they begin to goad God. They literally was goading Yahweh, provoking him with the misuse of his name. The Elohim began to appear to humanity in Enosh's day were not the watchers of Genesis 6:4. If they were, they had yet to make their unholy pact on Mount Hermon. So who were they and where did they come from? Well, obviously from the unseen realm, and obviously they were with the intent to destroy mankind. When we examine Greek mythology, we find clues. The gods inhabited a concept, or initiated a concept, I should say, called the doctrine of elimination. According to the ancient Greeks, in the beginning, chaos existed, and he gave birth to the goddess of night. And we could go on and down how all of this, and so from one god to the next, begin to give birth to different concepts. Not all of these were quote unquote beings as much as they were concepts of evil. Okay, so to sum up, the gods of chaos worked against Yahweh by suborning mankind to deception. Through false oaths, they persuaded mankind to abandon their affection to Yahweh. I believe that the Elohim who did this were driven by two desires. One, that they wanted to have an abode other than the one that was assigned to them, and to keep the eternal Melchizedek from taking possession of his throne. Simply put, they wanted Eretz. They wanted the field. In other words, they wanted access to the domain that had been assigned to Adam and to mankind. So they set up their own cosmic mountains. Essentially, they created doors and portals that allowed them to access into the human physical dimensions. Am I making sense to you?
Yes.
So their real goal was to take control of the physical eras. And to do so, they needed humans. Keep that thought in mind. Adam continued to preach righteousness, but in Eden, proclaiming that Yahweh would send a promised seed. Cain and his sons built cities on the other side of the river. Jordan is separating where Adam is versus where Cain is. Cain went out from the presence of Yahweh and he built a city and named the city after his son. The city that Genesis 4:17 refers to was not named after Cain's son, but after his grandson, which is also a grandson is also a son in biblical terms. And his grandson's name was Enoch, or actually we translate that as into Ired. In this case, it became the city of Eridu, Eridu. It's an antediluvian city that was considered by some to be the first city of the world. It was presumably built by the great Sumerian god Enki before the flood. And supposedly, we believe that the Tower of Babel post-flood was constructed in the same location. Humanity, because it wasn't actually, the Babel or Babylon is actually an area, not just a city. Humanity at that time was building a civilization. It was a sophisticated culture. In fact, if we was to go back through history, we would find that it's referred to as the Golden Age. And why? Because there was an interaction going on between humans and gods. If Atlantis was really real, this would have been when it existed. Adam conversed with the Creator. I'm quite sure that they didn't use sign language. Therefore, I'm quite sure that Adam probably understood physics, mathematics, aerodynamics, and probably much more. He probably could levitate objects, and I would venture to guess that he was telepathic. These things would have been passed on. That's how these people were able to build civilizations. Hollywood tells us that they were just 2 jumps from monkeys. But they weren't. They were much more sophisticated than we give them credit for being. And because of that, and because that the quote-unquote supernatural was the natural way of life, it wasn't unusual for them to build idols and worship other gods. Okay, this is all deception. And this is the beginning of the days that we're going to talk about here. It's the beginning of days of Noah. Hopefully, you can begin to see the pattern of how this is returning. AI.
Yep.
Mhm. And when you get over into Revelation, you got literally, and even in Daniel, you've got literally a being who presents himself proclaiming to be God. So, should we think this odd? No. We've been dumbed down.
Yeah.
Not them. And it's time for us to get our smarts back
Yes.
so that we're not continually deceived. I quite frankly think that UFOs have existed since Adam's time. I think there was a lot. In fact, the more I study Genesis and the more I study other books, I mean, Revelation is filled with a lot of supernatural stuff. Ezekiel, Isaiah, Daniel. There's a lot of supernatural stuff going on in the Bible. If we're going to use that term, and supernatural means beyond the natural, then yes, there's a lot of stuff going on. But what I'm trying to communicate to you, it was that it was naturally supernatural. Okay, so we've got to get back to stop. And the spiritual realm is beyond the natural. So we've got to get back to that. We've got to get back to where we think in those terms and begin to understand what was going on. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls is a reference to a pre-flood city named Salem. These same fragments also proclaim that Salem was the earth's capital. It was where the King of Kings lived. Who would that be? It would be Adam the Melchizedek. And after Adam would be Seth, and so forth and so on. Okay. By the time we get to the flood, we've got Methuselah being the Melchizedek. And he dies 5 days before the flood begins. But in between there, we've got Enoch. Enoch was a traveler. Have you ever thought of that? He went between here and there until they finally decided to keep him there. Why did they keep him there? Well, because in my estimation, it's because he was a righteous man that fully, a Melchizedek, or a firstborn that was about to be Melchizedek. I don't think he served as Melchizedek very long, but I think he was a Melchizedek. They needed a righteous high priest in the heavens. And I think that's what he's been doing, is officiating as a raptured human in the heavens. Okay? Got a question?
Well, I was just going to say, why would you need that if we have Yeshua?
I'm sorry?
Why would we need a high priest in the heavens if we have Yeshua?
In the heavens if we have Yeshua.
This is pre-Yeshua.
From
Mm-hmm.
Pre-cross.
Mm-hmm.
But why would you need a human when heaven is spirit, right?
Because you need two witnesses. One on earth and one in heaven. And Enoch's been serving as the human Melchizedek witness ever since that moment in time. And I honestly think that he's coming back in the book of Revelation as a witness. Now, I know there's a lot of people that disagree with me, but I think that he's one of those that comes back, and I think Elijah is the other, because he's the prophet. Mm-hmm.
Is that why there's such animus between Satan and the believer, that seed of the woman who crushed the seed of the serpent, because we replaced him?
Well, yes, to a degree, yes. In Christ Jesus, we replace him.
Yeah.
But I think he operated as the high priest because he wore the breastplate,
That covered.
and so when he approached Yahweh, Yahweh's glory went into him and into his breastplate, and he turned and he covered the assembly with that. That's my. I think here's okay. How do I express this? When I'm sitting and studying this stuff, there's times where visions will flash. And I'm not saying that this is absolutely what it is. I'm just going to tell you my impressions of what I believe. And that is that he had the capability of singing and reaching sounds that no one else had the ability of. And he could project things. And he's the cherubim that covers, right? All right, so that covering was not the covering for Yahweh. It was the covering over the people to protect them from the awesomeness of Yahweh. That's my feeling on that, the way this worked. And because of that, he grew prideful. And I think that was his first sin, was pride. Yeah. And so then when God says, okay, I'm going to bring my son into this, he grew jealous. And so you've got a progression. I don't think it all happened at once, but I think you have a progression. And he began to traffic his pride and his jealousy by getting others to align with him. And so what we're seeing is that these entities were, in my estimation, in operation before Mount Hermon of Genesis 6:4. And that's what we're seeing coming in. And because of that, then these 200 watchers make the pact on Genesis 6:4. And that's when we get even more evil. Because here's what I really think, is I think that they were looking for a way to, because they knew that the seed of the woman had been given authority over them. They had to extract the seed or the DNA from the woman to try to fit it into their DNA, because they have DNA too. And so that DNA, they were trying to discover a way of gaining a physical, material, carbon-based body. And every time they did, they created a body with a soul in it. And they needed soulless bodies. And that's why they kept going to animals and other creatures. Are you following me on that? Okay. And so they kept trying to do this because they needed the covering in order to interact and stay within our dimensions and to totally control mankind and to totally take over, to be able to see, the Antichrist is the seed of the serpent.
Yes, that's true.
And therefore, he's looking for the ability to have a woman seed DNA. That's a hybrid being that we're talking about here as the Antichrist.
Okay.
But Jesus isn't a hybrid.
No, he is not.
So we literally have the deity coming for mankind to transform mankind back into what we are to be spiritually. And yes, I think we will rule and reign with him, and I think we will sit in the divine council.
Amen.
But as far as to being able to say that we're going to replace everything that entity did, I think that Jesus actually is the one that stands between us and Yahweh, and will continue to stand between us and Yahweh. When Yahweh is manifesting his full brightness and glory, I don't think there's a being in the cosmos that can take that energy, that life force that he has. And I believe that that's Yeshua has to buffer us.
Yes. Question for you. Not to jump the gun with the flood. Did you believe that after God told Noah to build the ark and he flooded the earth, that some of the fallen angels took off the spaceships and hid somewhere? Or do you believe all of them got wiped out? Because I know they're spiritual beings, but what about the ones you believe that some escaping, actual physical bodies?
I'm not sure. I'm not going to say this absolutely for positive, but what I think is that we have a lot of disembodied Nephilim who are in contact with their fathers in the abyss.
Yes. That's good.
Sue, because Christ is the head and we're the body, don't we stand in that place with him? That's why the bride of Christ has to make herself ready so he can marry someone who can cohabit and co-rule with him.
Okay, what I'm talking about here is high priest. There can only be one high priest. There can only be one king. We will rule and reign with him, but we won't be the king or the high priest. That means that we are priests, but we are not the high priest. And the high priest is the one who went into the holies of holies. Does that make sense? And we get remember the lesser light reflects. So we get from him the reflection that he shines on us, the glory of God. We take the glory of God to the cosmos.
So Enoch is replaced by the great high priest.
Okay, Yeshua is operating as high priest.
Right.
I think Enoch is there still to this day as a witness, as a human witness. He's not seated at the Father's right hand. He is there as a witness that all is righteous. That righteousness has not been forsaken. And in that sense, the Melchizedek lineage is still in Enoch.
That makes sense that he would be one of the two witnesses then.
I'm making suppositions here. I hope you guys understand that, because I'm not saying I have right now scripture and verse that I can tell you that this is actually, but when I read certain passages, this is what I come up with. And this is why I think that's important. And I'm pretty sure that I deal with Enoch. Don't I deal with Enoch in the first volume 1? Samuel? Okay. As being a witness.
Yes.
Because he can testify that blood is on the altar.
Yes.
See, blood has to be on the altar. Now, he can testify now that it is Yeshua's blood that's on the altar. Because Yeshua took his blood and placed it on the altar. So, again, we're talking about legalities here. Everything has to be legal. And this is why the genealogies have to be in sync. Okay? All right, so the waters descend on Mount Hermon. And I think I've already said this one way or another. I think they were looking for sons to procreate as a means to an end. Genesis 6:4 says, in the King James says, they bare children to the same, became mighty men. The offspring were the same. Him in Hebrew. Him is translated like. So the offspring were like the sons of God. The sons of God are B'nai Elohim. They desired for beings like themselves to image themselves. So they sought out the daughters of men for that purpose. They believed that human women could provide them with offspring like themselves. And Genesis 6:2 means that if we paraphrase it, that they found the daughters beautiful. Well, not physically beautiful. What they found was they were tob, means they were good. It is used as a noun here rather than an adjective. So when we're putting this into context, in my opinion, Genesis 6:2 should read, the daughters of Adam were good for the purposes of the B'nai Elohim. You see, I think that in interpreting the Bible, that we have had human men as scribes to translate from the Hebrew into the Greek and into the English eventually what they thought would be the desires of these angels, or fallen angels.
That's right.
I'm going to tell you, I don't think that they care one rib about the sex.
No.
What they're looking for is not the sex, it's the product.
That's right, what he can produce.
Amen.
Okay, I don't know if you guys know who Dr. Thomas Horn is, but I watched a program earlier in the year where he said he thought that the Watchers wanted to leave their proper sphere of influence or existence and to enter Earth's three-dimensional reality. And they viewed that women's genetic material was fit for their cause. And I totally agree with that. Dr. Horn wondered if the Watchers were doing this because they were looking for the right combination of genetic material to bring forth soulless bodies. Again, that was right in line with what I have come to believe. That they want to inhabit soulless bodies. You see, they have bodies, but they can shape-shift. Whatever. You talk for 5 hours. Your words get a little twisted. But anyway, you got the point. And I think that they don't want another soul. They don't want to inhabit a body that has a soul that will conflict with their souls. They want to rule and reign that body. And so they kept creating beings with souls. And they continued without regard or respect to any life form. That's why we actually see hybrids, Chamaras, whatever it is, where you've got animals and men and the monsters that we see in the fairy tales and the myths. Okay, that's what we're talking about there. Gargoyles and the like. They continue to do so because they wanted to inhabit Earth, so it would be their field and not Yahweh's. But instead, they kept winding up with carbon-based bodies with souls. And that's God smart. Like, okay, I'm going to create something that you will never be able to figure out how to replicate. As smart as you are, you're not getting it. And I think that when they created these hybrid beings, the hybrid beings carried out their desires as well. So while you have second and third and fourth generation Nephilim, the bottom line is the Watchers were experimenting with human, animal, and even plant DNA of all things. And they came and went, carrying away what they seized. Those who they bakar are found acceptable for their chosen purpose. The gods produced the Titans and the Olympians, the demigods, the giants, Ishi males. ISYH denotes masculinity. The men whom the women bore were not Adam males, but they were Gabor males, like their fathers. They were hybrids with supernatural strength. Therefore, their name, Hashim, were well known and kept alive even after the flood. Yahweh said, "My spirit will not strive with Ha-Adam," the species of Adam. He wasn't looking among the Elohim for loyalty, but among the terrestrials. Soon, Yahweh's purpose for DNA had been corrupted, and every man's sperm spoke profanely. You want to digest that one? Only Noah was pure. Only his DNA was totally intact. Hebrews 11:7. By faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared the ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became the heir of righteousness, which is according to faith. Noah was told, by the way, if you decide to study the book of Hebrews, please keep in mind that it is a book concerning the Melchizedek. From start to finish. Our Hall of Faith, chapter 11, is the Hall of the Melchizedek faith. Why do they have faith? Because from the get-go, God gave them the plan. Abraham entered the Melchizedek lineage and the priesthood, if you will, not as a Melchizedek, but as the firstborn of faith. That makes him the difference. He wasn't a firstborn of a firstborn. He came in by faith. And from him came a Melchizedek. Isaac was Melchizedek. Jacob was Melchizedek. And Jacob hid the scepter in Judah. Please read chapter 38 of the second book. Isn't it chapter 38? I think it is. Or is 28 or 38? It's 38. Judah, the story of Judah and what happened to Judah. Okay. You'll see bless me. It just blessed me all over. My only comment was, oh God, wow. That is just phenomenal what God did with Judah to keep the Melchizedek lineage going. And how faithful he was. And you're not going to get that in Sunday school teachings, okay? I'm sorry. But this ties the story of Ruth to what God was doing to preserve the lineage and to keep it going, and how that there was a Perez, Judah's son, was illegitimate, right? Okay, so an illegitimate son, even if he's a firstborn, and in this case he's the firstborn of the family, cannot call a council because he's illegitimate. Guess who but to the 10th generation, that 10th generation can call a divine council. Guess who the 10th generation from Perez is?
Judah.
No, David, King David. Okay, so God awoke in David the Melchizedek lineage. And this is why God's blessings was on David. And God preserved it and kept it going, okay, till he got down to Mary. Okay, so there's the purity of the way the Lord lined this out and kept it going. No matter what the enemy threw at, God was always redeeming. I just gave it away, but you can get it. You can get it and bless your socks off too. So Noah was told to go build yourself a box to represent my house. The ark was not a boat, it was a box. The ark, or tabah, refers to box. Ta, bet, hey, in pictograph lettering, it's the sign of the house. Behold. Note the tav is in the sign. Is that up there? Okay. Okay, in the book, I detail how the dimensions of the ark foreshadowed and typed Yeshua. Down to the very dimensions of it, everything about the ark typed Yeshua. We're preserved in Yeshua. Okay? So I'm not going to go through the ark and all that it represented, but it represented the Melchizedek covenant that Yeshua holds with Yahweh. Like the Ark of Covenant, Noah's ark was rectangular in shape. Both arks were proportional in size. Their ratios, both arcs, ratios equal pi, meaning both were perfectly stable, since pi is the geometric perfection representing wisdom. The ark was signed one door, literally. There was one entry, one access point into its side. John 19:34. But one of the soldiers pierced his side. You just can't get more. It's just all the way through the ark. Jesus said unto them, Verily, verily, I say to you, I am the door. I am the door, and by me, if any man enters, he shall be saved. Yes. Noah, representing mankind, was perfected in the ark with the passing of 7 days before the rain came. The gods had corrupted the information stored in the genetics of man, which in turn brought forth characteristics not intended by Yahweh. To make matters worse, the watchers mixed kinds, sowing their non-terrestrial seed, DNA, into humanoids. But not just humanoids, they also perverted the animal and plant kingdoms with their DNA. They even went beyond that and crossbreed genes of different species by placing animal DNA into humans and so forth and so on. The spiritual message of Genesis 7 and 8 is that a battle raged in the unseen realm. When it was over, the adversary was defeated, and God would start over with Noah. Please note the parallels. It was then, as Jesus said it would be again, in the days of Noah. His assessment was profound, for essentially the fallen realm has placed upon mankind a mark of the beast. Just as it's been prophesied, it will happen again, and all who are marked by the beast will be destroyed. Genesis 7 speaks of the prevailing waters, whereas Genesis 8 speaks of diminishing waters. So with 8, there was a new beginning, one that would eventually bring forth Abram. The flood waters had prevailed for 5 months, but no, while the waters prevailed, while still at their peak, the ark rested. The ark rested, Noah, upon the Ars of Ararat. Ararat is a mountain range in the far north. In this instance, we would call it Turkey. However, the phrase for far north implies as up over the head, meaning that it's not a direction on the compass, but it is meaning in heavenly places within the cosmic spheres. In other words, Yeshua, the ark, rested upon Yahweh, the God of mankind, to perform the deed. As it was with Adam, so it will be with Noah. Yahweh renewed his Adamic covenant with Noah. Noah and his sons were to go forth and to be fruitful, to increase, multiply, excel, to bring forth abundance, abound, multiply, extend the authority of the priesthood. The Hebrew text of 9:8 reads, Elohim spoke Aleph Tav Noah to his Aleph Tav seed with him. As the supreme judge of the cosmos, Yahweh spoke to the three with Noah at the altar. They were at that point Aleph Tav seed of the Melchizedek region. He did not speak to Noah's sons, he spoke to his Aleph Tav seed. And one of the three would become the next firstborn of that generation. Yahweh affirmed to his region and the future firstborn that they were to maintain righteousness. Yahweh said, I will establish. Establish is Quam. And Quam connotes a lifting again. So a rising for the second time. In other words, Yahweh was saying, I place before you and your Aleph Tav seed my Melchizedek covenant. Therefore, never again will Eretz, my field, be consumed by floodwaters. Yahweh placed a rainbow as in the clouds as a sign of his covenant with Yeshua. Yahweh placed within the sphere of Eretz the symbol of his throne, a rainbow. I do set my bow in the cloud as a token. Revelation 4:3. And the one who sits there at the appearance of jasper and carnelian, a rainbow resembling emerald encircling the throne. We've got other references. The rainbow comes from the throne. So what he was saying was that I'm placing my symbol as a token that my Melchizedek will reign. R-E-I-G-N. So the sons left the ark and scattered, and Noah planted a vineyard, and he put down roots. Genesis 9:26, Noah blessed Yahweh, referring to him as the Elohim of Shem. That's how we have the first indicator that Shem would be the firstborn of the generation. Note that Ham is not anywhere in this blessing. Shem is mentioned, Japheth is mentioned, and Canaan is mentioned. Why Canaan and not Ham? Genesis 9:22 is our clue. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father, Olive Tav, nakedness. So maybe we should surmise that Canaan was somehow involved in this. However, it was Ham who openly spoke of Noah's nakedness. Nakedness in this verse means disgrace, uncovered. In other words, Ham saw the king uncovered and immediately went forth and spoke about it to his brothers and told them, meaning he announced to them, he stood up boldly and declared that the king was uncovered. The Melchizedek is uncovered. Ham left the Melchizedek uncovered and exploited the situation. Why wouldn't he cover his father? The only reason I can imagine is that the intent of his heart was not pure, that he had no desire to cover his father. Now we're talking about spiritual things here again, okay? The fact that Ham was willing to leave Noah uncovered is very telling, explains why the sin in this story is placed upon Ham and not Noah. The incident of him being drunk didn't somehow make him unrighteous. What it did was it showed Ham's heart. He was in rebellion to the authority of his father. It shows the loss of the Melchizedek covering. Genesis 10 is known as the Table of Nations. It provides the record of the sons of Noah and their nations divided after the flood, primarily as a register or listing of the Gentile tribes of Eretz. Israel is not listed in this listing. It did not exist until hundreds of years later, and when it did form, it was formed through Abraham, who is also not in this list. The pre-flood, all of Eretz was under one authority. Let me say that one again. The authority that covered Eretz pre-flood was under the authority of the Melchizedek. It was the kingdom authority. Post-flood, the earth is divided. Peleg's day does not mean that the continents split. It means that it became divided apportioned unto the Gentile nations. This is where the fullness of Gentiles, you know that expression? Until the fullness of Gentile comes in. And Peleg's day is when it began, when the earth was divided. So we have the Melchizedek now is only in Salem. All of the other portions of the earth are Gentile. Okay, this is very important that we get this. And it is that the Gentiles will reign throughout the earth until, and there is an until, when the fullness, this is why I think it's Ezekiel is told not to measure the outer court, because it belongs to the Gentiles. And the word Gentile here does not mean non-Jew. It means paganism. It means anti-Yahweh. The Melchizedek represented Yahweh And no other nation, tribe, tongue, people represented. And what did we find is this is all happening about the same time as the Tower of Babel. Okay, so we have a Nimrod who comes up. And what does Nimrod do? He builds a tower, right? So Eber, the great-grandson of Shem, has a son named Peleg. In his day, the earths were divided. Peleg means to literally split or divide. The upshot is that this becomes the Gentile system. Luke 21:24, Jerusalem shall be trodden down by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles is fulfilled. Noah's sons venture off into three different directions. Ham goes south, Japheth goes north. The middle part of the earth was supposed to belong to Shem, but he doesn't control it. What happens is we have Sumer and the Mesopotamian culture, crescent area, falling to it became to the Amorites. Amorites and Sumerians are basically the same people. Amorites were more city dwellers. Canaanites are more nomadic. But it's all basically the same. Okay. Technically, Abraham, because of where he was born, would have been classed as an Amorite. And so God calls him across. Okay, so there's 70 nations or 70 names that are listed in Genesis 10. These 70s were divided according to Noah's sons and their generations. It means according to their history. The 70 were not assigned to the Melchizedek, and that's what makes them Goy or Gentile. Yahweh assigned 70 judges from among his divine council to oversee the welfare of the 70 nations, to protect and to care for them, and to bring them into righteousness. However, those judges failed. Instead, they became power hungry, and they defied Yahweh. Among the leaders that rose up at that time was Nimrod. Nimrod is not a name, it's actually a description, which means rebellion. Also, just for your information, when you see the word Assyrian or the Assyrian, we're actually referring to a Nimrod-like person or entity. It's a person who is rebelling in leadership, and this is you see that term a lot in the Old Testament, especially in Isaiah, the Assyrian, blah, 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 and I have this against you, blah, 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 okay? It's a Nimrod type person. We could also, there's been many antichrists, but I would say to you that probably Nimrod was the first. Cush begot Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty worm on the earth. The name Cush means darkness, begot Nimrod. Well, ever an individual was conceived in darkness, it was Nimrod. Genesis 10:8, according to the Septuagint, Cush begot Nimrod, and he began to be a giant. This indicates that perhaps he transformed from one form to another. Whatever he was born, he began to be something else. That would mean that, again, you would have DNA being manipulated. Whatever he became was powerful and blasphemous. It went from the ordinary into the supernatural, foreshadowing the forthcoming of the Antichrist. Nimrod joined forces with the netherworld, those who hated Yahweh. He became a global king, the first global king that was not a Melchizedek region. As I've already said, he, in my opinion, is the first anti-Messiah, meaning he was the first in the place of. Almost as if it was a parenthetical thought surrounding the story of the Tower of Babel is the genealogies of Genesis 10 and 11. Nimrod built the Babylonian system. Although was not called Babylon in Nimrod's day, nevertheless, he was the father of the false system. Genesis 11:1. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. Eris had one language. Shephah means debar. Figuratively and literally, no boundaries existed at that time. Eris was a global community with one manner of speech. People traveled to the east, means that they breached the area between the mountains. Think of that in the area between the cosmic mountains, okay? Which was in Shinar, or Babylonia. And they dwelt there and remained there. The phrasing of the breach between the mountains indicate that they were seeking a portal which they could open because they believed that between the cosmic mountains of the gods, they would find security. In other words, they sought to find a breach between the netherworld and the upper regions of the cosmic planes. Shinar is a corruption of the Hebrew term Shinei Nibral. It means two rivers. In addition, there is the thought that Shinar was derived from the Hebrew pronunciation of the Akkadian word Sumer. So here again, we come back to the Sumerians and the Apalu. That's what I'm trying to come up with. You could do a deep study on the Sumerian religions and what they believed. And it's on the internet. You don't need to go buy a bunch of books. The Babylon is a Greek term, and it's an adaptation of the Akkadian term Babali. Babali means the gate of God, or Babala. It more precisely means the gateway to the gods. Hebrew is spelled Bavel and is translated as confusion because it has a close Hebrew verb that means to confuse. And so we have taught that the confusion of all this was going on, but it was more than just being confused. These people were literally trying to build a tower. In my estimation, it wasn't just going in height. They were trying to build a facility that would afford them the ability to go from this sphere to that sphere. I honestly think because of who and what Nimrod was doing, that he was able to commune with the fallen gods. And because he was able to commune with them, and because of the determination, the people were looking to the past. Do you remember that golden age that we talked about pre-flood? I think they were trying to recreate the golden age. And so they were trying to set up sovereignties that would oppose Yahweh's Melchizedek and Yahweh's system. They journeyed like Cain into the ancient antiquities of things between the rivers. They agreed as with one voice, with one mind, and they made a place for the common cause that they might worship the gods as divine beings. The book of Jasher and Josephus both record that Nimrod was the one who incited the building of the tower, which was a ziggurat and a height that reached towards the heavens. Well, here's my thought. If God thought that they could do it, why shouldn't we? I'm going to propose to you that Nimrod had learned to be interdimensional himself. Somehow, he had increased his bandwidth and allowed him, that had given him access to the underworld and the higher cosmic dimensions. In other words, his data bank of language information had become one with the netherworld. He could communicate with them, which means he could also perceive cosmic dimensions. He was unified soul and purpose with the fallen gods. Genesis 11:4. Let us build for the watchers a tower whose top will transport us into the cosmic mountains, so we may make a name, or else we will be scattered abroad and as nothing upon the face of the earth. That's my paraphrasing of that verse. Yahweh descended into Eretz, into the regions, and he mixed up not just the languages of the people. I also believe he confused the languages of the gods. He bela them. Essentially, he terminated their ability to pass knowledge, celestial information between their ranks and the Goyim, the Gentiles. That action caused a reduction of bandwidth in the Gentiles, and in my opinion, a confusion of purpose in the fallen realm. I think this is why they are at odds with each other, and they're territorial now. The confusion weakened the fallen realm's ability to communicate with mankind on a global basis. You remember Prince of Persia, Prince of Greece? Okay, that's what we're talking about here. So after the Tower of Babel, Yahweh appointed a language other than Hebrew for every tribe on the earth. Broken apart, they were scattered across the face of the earth. And for that reason, Yahweh called upon Abram. It was time to restructure the Melchizedek system. It was time for a new focus, one that would require a new man, a man who would be the first Hebrew. Genesis 10:23-31 lists Shem's children. On the other hand, Genesis 11:10-26 tracks the generation of firstborns. The firstborn was Ariphax, Shelah, Eber, and Peleg, and so forth. This is why the prodigy of Elam, Shem's firstborn, is not included in Genesis 11, where it is in 10. Instead, Moses focused on Ariphax and Eber and Peleg. Because why? That was when the earth was divided, and the system needed to be renewed. Let me point out that the earth was divided in Peleg's day. So not all that was listed here in this Genesis 11, became Melchizedek, firstborns. There were only two that I can determine that became firstborn after the flood, other than Shem. Those two would be Peleg and Eber. And Peleg died before Eber, and he died before Shem. So I think that he actually never became Melchizedek. I think that the last serving Melchizedek before Isaac would have been Eber. So, huh?
Can we have a break?
Yeah, I'm right there. I'm just giving 2 more minutes. One more minute. Ruth, Terah, and the others on the list are the legal firstborns of their family lines, not of the generations. Okay, so as I just said, the global priesthood, I believe, paused with Eber as God prepared Isaac and Jacob. Okay, that's it. We're through.
Well, this concludes sessions 3 and 4 of A Survey of Genesis Through the Lens of a Kingdom Scope by author Sue Watkins. Let me highly encourage you, go to her Amazon page, amazon.com. Go to her page, buy her books. You'll be so blessed by the revelation that God has given her, and she'll tell you herself what she's put out. It's just really scratching the surface. This is an unfolding, never-ending revelation, and she would highly encourage you yourself to go search these things out. I know her personally, and I know that she would do that. So, and if you go to her page and you buy her books, be sure to leave her a comment, and she'd love to hear from you. She'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, or anything that you might have received from the Lord that you think she may be blessed by. But again, do that. Go to her page, buy her books, and leave her a comment. Let her know that you're blessed by her work. And yeah, that would be awesome. So, all right. So before I let you go, let me go ahead and release this blessing to you. And the Lord bless you and the Lord keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you shalom, give you peace. And Father, I pray that you release the angels now to bring this blessing to pass, Lord, for your glory and your honor and your praise in Yeshua's mighty name. All right, you've been listening to Sue Watkins on Smashing Pillars. I'm Samuel. Until next time, shalom, shalom.